I'm Steve, if we haven't met before, but I just was thinking during that singing, whenever the instruments quiet down, the choir, and just to hear everyone's voices singing together, man, imagine what eternity is going to be like. Millions from all around the world. We're doing an interview this morning, and we've been doing some interview-type things each week of Nation Changers. So I'm going to invite Kat Smith up, Don Bainey, and Sanele Gasa to come and join me on stage. Would you give them a big round of applause, please? Great, thanks, guys. Great. Would you mind just checking that your mic's working? Sanele, I'm going to start your side. If you just talk into it, say hello, or something like that.
Hello, hello. 1, 2.
They're coming through. Kat?
Testing, hello.
Hello, hello.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you. So a little bit of background. Donovan and Hayley Bainey have been part of the church for many years. Some years back, as many of you already know, they had this dream and vision to do something in the disaster relief space. There is no aid organization, no aid organization in South Africa that was Christian and working internationally. And so they decided to start one. Was it last year, Kat? September last year, Kat came on board as on staff onto City Hope Disaster Relief and administrates things. And Sanele does many amazing things. He lives in Embo. He started his own coffee business. He helps lead the youth at Cityhill Embo. He's one of our baristas here. He's got one of the smiliest faces in the world. And on top of all of that is volunteers with City Hope Disaster Relief, often when they go out on projects. Sanele is right there. So a huge thank you to all of you guys for joining us this morning. Kat, would you mind telling us what has City Hope Disaster Relief been up to in the last little while?
Well, this year, just in the first 6 months, we responded to about 15 different disasters across South Africa and into Africa a little bit. We've probably affected about 7,800 individuals across the country through distributing relief aids such as food, blankets, toiletries, and things like that. So 2 of our major responses have been into Malawi as well as the recent KZN floods. So in March this year, there was those 2 cyclones that hit Mozambique. So the week prior to the first cyclone, Malawi actually was hit by a major flood which affected or displaced about 90,000 individuals and actually resulted in about 60 fatalities in Malawi alone in March. So City Hope has responded into Malawi a number of times, whether it's flood or drought. So we have quite strong relationships there. So we sent a team across of Oki, Sanele, and myself. It was just the week following the first cyclone in Mozambique. And we supported about 1,000 families with up to 20 tons of food aid. So we distributed rice and beans and maize meal across 3 of the different districts that had been affected in Malawi. So that was a great opportunity just to make a big impact and, yeah, to see lives changed. And then KZN floods has kept us busy. As we all know, it was in April last month. So we responded into 11 communities within the first 14 days. So that's been a busy period for us. Up from Dustinhoek, Stockville, Mulweni, down to Umlazi and Chatsworth. Yeah, so we probably supported about 2,000 individuals within the first 2 weeks following the KZN floods. And we're still working into supporting different communities. We're still building a couple of houses. We've taken a handful of families under our wing, and we've taken them shopping for school uniforms and school supplies to get them back into school, and we're helping their families rebuild their homes to get them back on their feet. And then also Tyburn Primary in Chatsworth was quite devastatingly affected by the floods. So we've been pouring a little bit of money into there, helping them to clear out the damage and replace their furniture and things like that. So it's been busy.
Wow. I don't know about you, but when I hear stories of what we're able to do, and this is each week we've been telling different stories, but to hear this on top of everything else that's happening from here, from Cityhill Church, I get seriously inspired by what you guys are doing. And I say you guys, it's us, because we're doing it all together. But just well done. Big high five to all of you guys. Kat, just before I move to Sanele, Mark, would you mind putting up that picture of the Hope kits? You guys pack those big buckets as a relief kit to put into aid situations, particularly here in South Africa. I know you have a packing, you get volunteers from the church to help you pack periodically. The last time you guys packed was really amazing. I know you've got some pics of that. Would you talk us through it?
Well, it was a busy period, as you know, following the KZN floods. So we called for an urgent packing session. We needed to pack about 400 to 500 buckets. In the middle of the week, it was a mid-business time packing session. So we just sent out a call to our community, and the volunteers just poured in from this church, from the schools, from the colleges. We had between 30 and 40 volunteers that came through.
There they all are there, that picture.
We'd set aside the whole afternoon to get the job done, and because of the number of hands, we had everything done within 1 hour. So it was phenomenal. So thank you.
Amazing. Fantastic. So Nelly, thanks for all of your help volunteering with City Hope Disaster Relief as well. How has it impacted you personally? And would you mind telling us a story of a relief situation that you were involved in that really touched you?
Good morning, everyone. Sanmonan. I can say that City Hope have taught me a lot, especially doing this ministry for a few years. It have taught me to be grateful. Because I can say for my personal story, I grew up in Amber with both parents, you know, and we couldn't afford most of the things, you know. I can say I have a taste of how poverty tastes, you know, that feeling. I can say it have taught me to be grateful and to point things that I can be grateful for to God. Even though I was going through that, but I could say, God, I'm so grateful that I have parents. I'm so grateful that I have a shelter. I'm so grateful that I have warm water, you know. And yeah, it have taught me a lot, and I'm so grateful for that. As Kat shared earlier, that we've been so busy lately. We went to Klaarwater. Is it Klaarwater? Yes, in Klaarwater. Yes, that's what Kat said. I said Klaarwater. She said Klaarwater. I said, okay. Yeah, and we've been to Malawi lately early this year, sorry. As you can see, the pictures are there. And to be honest, when I see the children smiling, worshiping Jesus, I still get hope, you know, as it is called City Hope. And we also helped Molweni family. As you can see, it's a family of 10. It's a family of 10, and they're living in that small tin house.
So that's their house behind them there?
Yes, that's their house. They have 4 beds, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure how they sleep. Maybe it's 3-3, or I don't know how they sleep. But it's very sad. And also a family in Klaarwater, during the floods, they lost a son, a 15-year-old boy, and we still check up on them. How they're doing, but you can hear from the mom that she's still mourning a lot, you know, because she's like, we even moved from that house because it took away my son, and I can't even be on those grounds. Wow. And yeah.
Well done. Thanks for your help there. Don, finally coming to you, just want to celebrate your guys' courage. I know you've put a lot of time and effort into City Hope Disaster Relief. But to ask a slightly different question, you're also involved in corporate. Some of you may not be aware, but earlier this year, Don was made the MD of Mr. Price, which includes Mr. Price Sports, Mr. Price Apparel, and Mr. Price Home. So all of that he's now responsible for. Don, a question. We're looking at the disasters and the stuff that we're doing here, but on a macro level, what is your personal view of the macroeconomic situation in our city at the moment, in the country, and what are the things that give you hope?
Steve, yeah, before I answer that, if I just want to honor these two. It's been such a privilege and an inspiration to watch these two on the front lines of the relief operations that have gone on over the past couple of weeks and months. You guys are champions. They really are an amazing team. Yeah. In terms of, sorry, is that better? In terms of the economy, I shared an analogy with some of my associates about 2 weeks back. So maybe the best way I can describe my feelings on things is to share that. And it was a metaphor that went something like this, that when you're in the doldrums, you've got three choices. Either you can blame the wind, or you can wait for the wind to change, or you can adjust the sails. And I think South Africans have got this amazing ability to adjust the sails. We're an extremely resilient bunch. We've got some exceptionally strong businesses, some really great leaders. And it's not to say that we must put in our heads in the sand and not acknowledge that there are problems out there, because there absolutely are problems. The economy is not growing at the rate that we'd like it to. And unemployment is high, social inequality is high. Trump's not making things easier with his trade war on China. But we've been through much worse, and we are a resilient bunch, and I genuinely believe that we've bottomed out in the cycle now, and we're going to start seeing some really good green shoots coming through in the next couple of weeks and months, and I'm really anticipating a turning in the economy. In terms of what gives me hope, maybe just another story that I can share. In my job, I get to travel to all corners of the country, and obviously visiting our stores.
How many people do you guys employ altogether, Mr. Price, as a group?
So just a correction, I run our clothing division, which is just Mr. Price. So I'm not sure about the rest of it, but in my division it's about 10,000 people. I think it's about 17,000 in all. But yeah, I get to travel to our stores, and the one thing that strikes me about every store that I walk into is how our people are. There's always a smile on their faces, and there's a genuine smile and a genuine positivity. And it's not to say that they don't have problems or issues or hurdles that they're facing, but they're able to overcome those and sort of look beyond those. And I always come home and say to Hayley that I just see that those 10,000 people that I get to see are a microcosm of the broader South African population. And I think that's something that we can be incredibly proud of, that we are a nation that, for the most part, is able to look past our sort of short-term struggles and hurdles, and we're able to put a smile on our face and just to be positive, even in the face of sometimes daunting circumstances. And I don't think there's a nation in this world that is like us. And for that, I think it really just does give me hope and joy.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Don, for sharing that. Kat, just before we say goodbye, your sister is Jackie Mungavin, who is speaking at the Flourish Women's Conference. So your niece is Kiara, who had that bad car accident. How worthwhile will it be for women to buy a Flourish ticket and come along to listen to your sister speak in August?
Definitely very worthwhile. How can I? Yeah, she's amazing, and she's been preaching out of this world this year. She's been preaching a number of times every weekend and throughout the week, and she's been doing an amazing job. I've been to most of her sermons, and she's been saying unbelievable things, so it'll definitely be very worth it.
Fantastic.
With City Hope, we get able to help building the homes that were demolished by floods. For instance, the one in Molweni we will build 2 bedrooms for them, because it's a big family, and we're also helping the one in Stockville and the one in Clarota. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. Could we give them a massive round of applause? Thanks, Liz. Showing Melville you can move the pulpit. Great, yeah, thank you. Guys, 2 bits of feedback. The first one relates to our Nation Changes projects. So 2 weeks ago, this time I got up and said we were looking to do 50 projects this year between the 12th of July and the 12th of August. We needed 520 volunteers and 250,000 rand. The last 14 days, different people have been taking different projects, and yesterday, Nadine told me that all our goals have been ticked on that board. All the projects been taken. Amazing. Amazing. So well done. Thank you to all of those. I wouldn't say that the money's all been given, but it's all been pledged, ticked, the different projects. So that will come in between now and the end of August. So massive joy just to be part of doing things like this. And second way, just by way of information, is that Jackson and I are taking a fractionally longer leave this year than we normally do over July. We just, at the end of last year, felt I needed just a little more gap to deep charge my batteries for a bit, so we'll be away for 5 weeks. And all the services, everything obviously runs as normal. But part of the reason for saying it is that those 3 weeks of the winter kids, so the July school holidays, we've got Ed Strong with us 3 weeks in a row, morning and evening, doing a study in the Old Testament related to the tabernacle and the temple, helping unpack. In fact, the series is called Unpacked, how all of that works. So Ed's an amazing Bible teacher. If you're around in July, it's going to be an amazing, end of June and July, amazing time with him there. This morning, I'd like to speak about about 5 signs of a base church. Jack, sorry, I left my water down there. Thanks, Joris. In the book of Acts, in the first part of Acts, I beg your pardon, if you don't mind putting up that map, most of the action in the first few chapters of Acts happens in Jerusalem, down at that red dot. Jerusalem was a base church that impacted all around the world. But in Acts chapter 11, we see there was a swivel that happened. It was quite interesting. I'm going to read the story today. But from Acts 11 onwards, it seemed like the center of action moved to Antioch. Jerusalem was still going, but a lot of work was happening in Antioch. And although the words base church aren't in the Bible, the idea certainly is that the church in Antioch became a major base from which a lot of other churches were planted and a lot of things happened. And when I look at the story of the church in Antioch, I'm pretty inspired. I draw probably about 15 things out of it. I've just picked 5 for this morning. But I look at that church, it's like God puts a little snapshot in the Bible helping inspire us, Cityhill, Hillcrest as a local church, on how to be nation changers, how to be a base church that doesn't just settle for impacting a neighborhood, but lifts our vision to say, God, we want to impact the world. And this church in Antioch is a church that helps us touch on some of these things. So I'm going to pick up Acts 11, verse 19 through to 30, and then there's 3 verses in Acts 13 that are a follow-on from that story. It says this, now those who had been scattered by the persecution that broke out when Stephen was killed, traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word only among Jews. Just to pause there. Stephen was killed in Jerusalem. That story is told in Acts 6, 7, the beginning of chapter 8. And it says, as Stephen was killed, a tremendous persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And it says, everyone except the apostles were scattered. People were running in fear of their lives. Many Christ followers were being thrown in jail. And it says those who had been scattered, they were running for their lives, still spoke about God wherever they went. At first, only to the other Jews, because it was mainly Jewish, the church in Jerusalem. But it said some of them, verse 20, however, men from Cyprus and Cyrene went to Antioch, which is in what is now modern-day Turkey, and began to speak to Greeks also, telling them, it's an important phrase, the good news about the Lord Jesus. The Lord's hand was with them, and a great number of people believed and turned to the Lord. So you've got Jews, now you've got Greeks all piling in. News of this reached the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. I'm going to come back to this guy, Barnabas. They sent Barnabas from Jerusalem up to Antioch. When he arrived and saw what the grace of God had done, he was glad and encouraged them. Another important phrase, all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. He was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. Just as an aside, do people say that about you and me? He was a good man or woman, full of the Holy Spirit and faith. Again, a great number of people brought to the Lord. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus, which was further north, to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul, he's later called Paul, writer of a lot of the books of the New Testament, met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. For the first time in Christian history, that name was given to people, Christ followers, little Christs, if you like. This was the church. People looked at that and said, those are Christ followers, those disciples, Christians. During this time, some prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, a guy named Agabus, is a name for a future child, if any of those parents who dedicated kids are going to have another one. A guy named Agabus stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. And Luke, the writer, puts Tisanakis here. This happened during the reign of Claudius. There actually was a famine, as Agabus had prophesied. The disciples, now in this church in Antioch, as each one was able, decided to provide help for the brothers and sisters living in Judea. This they did, sending their gifts to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. Judea was back where Jerusalem was, so they took a financial offering, gift, and sent it back with Barnabas and Saul. Jump Acts 12 and Acts 13:1 says this. Now in the church at Antioch, so it's the same church that had sent the money down to Jerusalem, there were prophets and teachers. And it gives a list of 5 people's names here. Barnabas, Simeon, called Niger or Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Those 5 guys, it says prophets or teachers. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul, so that was on this, the first and last guy on that list, for the work to which I've called them, which was apostolic work, being sent out, going and planting churches. So after they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off, Barnabas and Paul. It's a snapshot picture of one of the earliest churches. And from the end of this story onwards and the rest of the book of Acts, Barnabas and Saul, and then later on Paul and Silas go out from this church in Antioch and plant other churches. Later on they establish a base in Ephesus and plant more churches from there. But as I dive into this story, there's 5 things I take. Well, as I said, there's a lot more, but 5 for today that are for me signs of what it means to be a base church, which is certain in our hearts that we would be as a church as well. And the first thing is this, is that they were a telling, putting that in inverted commas, a telling church. We just read this verse a little earlier. It said some of them went to Antioch and began telling them the good news about the Lord Jesus. You might have thought that if you were running for your life, if you had been persecuted because of your Christian faith, you would go into a new region and you'd be quiet about what you believed. You'd be a little bit of an undercover Christian, just not wanting to rock the boat, just going with the flow. Let's just spend our first 2 or 3 years in the new city, just see what everyone else believes. Then maybe we'll let 1 or 2 people know we're Christ followers. It says quite the opposite. It says as they were running, as they were fleeing from the persecution, they were talking to people about Christ. This is how the church grew and how the gospel spread. They were passionate about it. I'm so excited when I hear stories of people in this church who get excited and extend invitations. We spoke earlier this year about each one reach one. That we would be, if you like, using these words, a telling church. That we wouldn't just be sitting back, our faith undercover. That our faith would be living and out there. At our last intro tea, we had a whole lot of people come. We have those intro teas just about once a month. People saying they want to become members here at Cityhill Church. And we start those intro teas, as most of you know, by going around just hearing different people's stories. And at the last intro tea, a couple were seated there, and the lady started to tell their story. She said, we used to attend church, but when we moved to Hillcrest, we didn't. We just got lazy. And our next door neighbor invited our daughter along with them to church. I don't know who that next door neighbor is, but well done. Excellent sneaky move. Their daughter came along with them to church near the beginning of this year. Loved Cityhill kids. Went home buzzed up. The next Sunday morning said to her mom and dad, I want to go back to that church. Her folks were basically arms twisted by their daughter to come to this church because of the kindness of their neighbors in inviting. I heard another story. A retired couple built a house just across the road from us. And I interacted with the gentleman a little bit, and they weren't connected with church. And I walked away from that conversation thinking, I'd love to invite them. And I didn't get around to it, to my shame. I didn't get around to following it up with an invitation. And I bumped into him in a coffee shop the other day, and he said, hey, we came to your church on Easter Sunday morning. I said, how did that happen? He said, well, an interesting thing, our son and daughter-in-law have been coming to Cityhill from the beginning of the year. And as he said his son's name, I remembered that I'd met that son. You guys might possibly be here this morning. And how they came to church was that when we first used this phrase, each one reach one, a couple who are part of this church went home. The next day, their kids were out riding bicycles. And their neighbors' kids were out riding bicycles, and they said to them, hey, we're starting the detox series next week. Wouldn't you come along with us to church? And their next door neighbors with all of their kids came along to church for the first time at the beginning of the year. And their neighbors, that was the son of our neighbor. And the reason I'm telling these stories is because sometimes we have in our minds that for us to do things for God or to serve God, work together with God, we envisage big, great things somehow in our brain. But sometimes some of the greatest stuff we can do is just be ourselves, like the good version of ourselves. But just tell others. Kids are riding bikes, say, hey, wouldn't you like to come along? To begin to share about Christ when that opportunity presents itself. That we would be a base church because we're a telling church. We're not closed doors just trying to bolt everything down. It's the reason we've stuck a banner on the road that says, come as you are. So well done. And may we do a lot more of this. And one of the interesting fruits, 3 times it uses this phrase. It says the Lord's hand was with them, and a great number of people believed and turned to the Lord. Now, I know that the Bible doesn't give an exact number, incidentally, of what this church was, how many people attended that church. But it doesn't shy away from using the phrase great number. I've had people say to me, Cityhill Church is too big for me to join. And I kind of puzzle about that because I think, well, whichever church you join, I presume if you go and speak to those pastors of those churches, they are crying out to God for more people to become Christ followers. And if that happens and more people join that church, well, then you're going to be in trouble wherever you go. That's just a little aside. It's not a rant. There's different churches have got different flavors and thumbprints and thank God for churches of all sizes. It doesn't have to do with the size. It's got to do with, if you like, the heat, the fight. Are we all of us churches, are we living out the gospel? Are we telling churches? Second thing I draw from this verse, or from these verses, that it was a multicultural church. Now, there's some interesting things buried in these verses I've just read. It said up front that men from Cyprus and Cyrene went, and there were guys speaking to Jews. And then it says almost like this amazing thing happened, and some of them began to speak to Greeks also. Now, Jews and Greeks are poles apart. Jews did not speak to Greeks or any non-Jews. That's a radical statement. It was saying we are going outside, the Jews saying we're going outside of our culture group of origin, and we're going to connect with people from other culture groups. So this church starts with this multicultural Jewish-Greek mix. Then that list of 5 names that I read, this is interesting. It says this: Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Now, Barnabas was a Jewish guy from Jerusalem. Simeon, called Niger or Niger, that word has got a Latin root, and the word very simply means black. Most Bible commentators believe that Simeon was a dark-skinned man, and Niger was like his nickname. My brother was part of an Afrikaans church in Bloemfontein, and they had 3 Piets in their church. And the one Piet had blonde hair, and the other Piet had black hair, and the other Piet, I don't know what caused him to get his nickname, but they just nicknamed them Wit Piet, Swart Piet, and Blauw Piet. Black Piet, White Piet, and Blue Piet, for those who don't speak Afrikaans. And Wit Piet, one of my brother's good mates, they just call him Witte now, like Whitey, because of his hair color. So I'm just trying to get inside this, because it says Simeon, maybe it was a nickname. But most commentators believe there was a dark-skinned man who was part of this leadership team. Lucius of Cyrene. Cyrene was, again, far away. It was where modern-day Libya is. It was a town in an African country, part of the Roman Empire. Manaen, he was raised with royalty, raised in the palace with Herod, the rulers of the day. And then Saul, another Jewish guy who was well trained in all the Jewish religion, but from Tarsus up north. Just that list of 5 names says to me that when the gospel gets in people's hearts, people from very different backgrounds get together and he uses us. They were a church made of people of different language and cultural backgrounds, and it's absolutely beautiful. You see, what happens naturally between cultures is there's hostility and there's dividing walls. Naturally, cultures, English and Afrikaans, we go and have Anglo-Boer wars. Where there's people, wherever you are in the world, people look down on other cultures, there's dividing walls. And the Bible says this amazing thing in Ephesians chapter 2. It says, for he, Christ himself, is our peace and has made the 2 groups one. Speaking about Jews and Gentiles, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. A natural dividing wall of hostility that exists naturally between different cultures. Christ breaks into that. He says, I'm tearing walls down. Part of our dream for this local church is to become more and more multicultural. Not just tokenistically, but heart connection. There's no list of, just that list of names. All these guys they taught and they were prophets together. I read in the news 2 articles this week, which made me so sad. The first one, Cape Town International Airport, a black family at a check-in desk, and a man, presumably white from the way the story is written, starts going on a rant about you people. It's you people, you're the problem. In the same week, there's another newspaper article in Bedford View, licensing department. One of the officials behind the counter, presumably black because of the way the story is written, has a rant against you white people. And I read that and I think, there we go, there's our dividing wall of hostility. It sits there. I'm just using black and white as just for this particular analogy. And in the middle of that, the gospel wants to crash in and destroy those walls. That no matter what color your skin pigmentation is, and no matter what language background you come from, is that in our hearts it's no longer you people and us people, but it's us, the church of Christ, that we are supernaturally bonded together, brothers and sisters in Christ. It's not you, it's us. Sending a picture, a supernatural picture to a world that desperately needs something different. That this is what Christ's gospel looks like. I hope we're all on the journey of allowing God to pull down walls, the prejudices which we just drag along with us from our upbringing. Thirdly, this was an encouraging church. It was a telling church, a multicultural church, and an encouraging church. Listen to this verse. It says, when he, Barnabas, arrived and saw what the grace of God had done, he was glad and encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. Now, what's really interesting about Barnabas, this guy, is his name Barnabas was actually also a nickname. His real name was Joseph. We read that back in Acts chapter 4, verse 36, I think it is. Did I put that verse in? So this is our introduction to this guy earlier on in Acts 4. He says, Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas. Joseph, who was nicknamed, if you like, Barnabas. And Barnabas means son of encouragement. I was thinking when I was preparing of how amazing this church is with high-fiving and encouragement, but and the number of people who are brilliant at it, but I thought of Patrice Masson. Patrice has got this amazing gift of encouragement. I've never walked away from a conversation with Patrice where I felt lower in my spirits than when I engaged. And I'm not just, you've got an amazing gift of encouragement. So maybe Joseph in their church was like Patrice, and they just nicknamed him, hey, son of encouragement. Gee, you get near that guy. There's just tiger steaks and gunpowder soup is on the menu every single time. And this Barnabas, son of encouragement, that's what his nickname means. It says he arrives in this church in Antioch. He sees all that God's doing. And he's just, what does he do? He does what he does. He encourages. And his message of encouragement is, guys, let's all remain, I don't want to misquote his words here, true to the Lord with all our hearts. Why is that such an important message for us to carry? It's because it's tremendously difficult to stay wholehearted in our faith, and it's quite easy to grow half-hearted. And so there might be times when we were wholehearted with all our hearts, and then we get distracted and we drift away a little bit, and we end up just being partially hearted, half-hearted. And Barnabas, the son of encouragement, steps into the church and says, guys, you're doing a great job, but stay true to God with all your hearts, wholehearted. Here's a question. Do you think that should just be the job of one guy? The Barnabas guy, the Patrice. Like, okay, yeah, Patrice, he's the positive guy in our church. But all the rest of us, things are bad. Surely this should be part of our church culture, and is. I'm not saying it is, but surely this should be in our hearts. So here's a question. I'm posing to you, posing to me in the mirror. Are you a son or daughter of encouragement? When people interact with us, is there something of encouragement that flows from us? Encouragement pretty much means give courage. Do you know we can give courage just by being positive? We've got a lot to be positive about. I'm not talking, God is our Father. I think that's positive. We know the end of the story already. That's positive. We know that in this life, He is with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. I'm not trying to say we work something up. It's there already. We should all be sons, daughters of encouragement. Sometimes in our staff and different meeting contexts, we refer to this as having a high five culture. We look for excuses to high five cool things that people have done. Someone might come down, in a review meeting or staff meeting, I say, guys, anything to high five? And someone will say, well, so-and-so did this, and it was a behind-the-scenes action, but it had an impact. And everybody just celebrate. That's fantastic. Here's a question, continuing on from my previous one. When people walk away from a conversation with you or with me, do they feel a little more encouraged? Or do they walk away thinking, dear God, I need to find courage? Guys, that's in a very generic sense. There's some people who are, you so see the black cloud and miss the silver linings, the bright sunshine of God, that it's like a habit starts to form where the start of your sentences is often, well, the thing is, or you know what the trouble is, you know what the bad thing about it is. I'm saying this as encouragement. Imagine we could grab those habits and the starting point was, well, you know what the thing is. You know what there is to be grateful about and positive about. I'm not saying we ignore problems, because else how can you fix them? But if that's always the leading edge, then you're not a son or daughter of encouragement. Then we're not Barnabas. Then we're the people that are triggering either fear or discouragement. Or I'm astonished at how many people here speak about our country. That's why I asked on that question. Where the leading edge for the first 10 minutes is how terrible things are. And you listen for 5-10 minutes, you think, gee, I just need to book myself a ticket to anywhere else in the world. Like even South Sudan. North Korea. But we need base churches in every country of the world. Everywhere, every city. Where the people, sons of encouragement, God's with us. Wow, this is amazing. What are we going to do next? How? Does that make sense? Nikki Kinder, who heads up Cityhill Kids, told me this amazing story. Speaking of sons of encouragement, daughter of encouragement story. One of the volunteers on her kids' team lives in Maritzburg and started driving through to Cityhill and just loved what they saw and got involved, started volunteering on Cityhill Kids. Her husband, as far as I understand, got a job transferred to Johannesburg. So at the end of last year, they were about to leave and move to Joburg. In fact, her husband had bought a house there for them to move into. And in prayer, she felt like God said to her, this is our church home, Cityhill in Hillcrest. And her husband had come along to church with her and felt the same thing. But the difficulty was his job was in Joburg. The positive thing was that both of their daughters, who are now, one's in high school, one I think in grade 7, are being homeschooled. So what she did is she decided this is our home church in Hillcrest. They kept their home in Maritzburg, and the family commutes between Maritzburg and Joburg. She plans to be at their Maritzburg home whenever she's on Cityhill Kids duty. So you're like, wow, that's also when I heard that's fantastic. So when they say, please sign up for Winter Kids, you just go for it, one Sunday in a year. It's awesome to help with the kids. So they're commuting based on God said Cityhill's our church home. Now imagine if you're leading that team as Nikki is or on staff or any one of the volunteers, and imagine when this lady arrives every third Sunday, whenever her duty is, imagine just her being there, daughter of encouragement. It's like, okay, we came back from Joburg last week because I'm on Cityhill Kids duty this week. Then next week we're going back to Joburg. Her husband's looking for another job in Durban because this is where God's called them to be. What? That inspires me. That encourages me. That's a Barnabas type story. The fourth thing I see, and I got a little excited, so I need to move quickly here, is that it was a generous church. And let me give you number 5 as well. A generous church and a sending church. Generous and sending. It tells the story of a prophet. So imagine it in this context. A guy named Agabus gets up, grabs the mic. He says, guys, I feel God's shown me that in a year's time there's going to be a famine throughout our country. You think that drought was bad? We've got worse famine coming. And it's going to be particularly bad in Zimbabwe. And everyone here says, wow, if that's what God's saying, we need to get money together. And they send a massive gift with Paul and Barnabas for a famine that hasn't even happened yet. That's how generous they were. This church oozed the idea that we exist not just for ourselves, but for things beyond us. I'm so delighted and inspired to be part of Cityhill, this big thinking, big hearted church. The reason I'm saying this is because to stir us to even more. But we heard this morning of how we're able to help with disasters and flood reliefs. We heard last week, I think it was, about how we have sent 14,700 Bibles into other countries in Africa where there's Bible poverty. SBCI, the theological training material, nation changes. In 14 days to have all those projects taken, that money come in and people saying, well, aren't there any more projects left? Please, we want to do something more. Speaks to the idea that some of this generosity sits here in this church, and it's amazing. Unknown to you, there's some other things that we've just done. And your generosity through tithes and offerings has enabled us. This year we sent a gift of $10,000 to Burkina Faso. Chim, one of our elders, has got partners there who are working into a very, very Islamic area. And one of the best ways to reach into these Islamic areas is with education. And by building 2 classrooms, the chief of that area has invited them to come and teach lessons in the school and to start a church there in the school. Our finance being sent to Burkina Faso. You ever been there? I've never been to Burkina Faso. But we've got 2 classrooms in Burkina Faso that came from some of our generosity. We've been able to do a tent for a church in Mozambique. This year we're hoping to do more into Swaziland, Lesotho, and southern Mozambique to help churches with some buildings. Just as the need arises and as we're able to, sowing money into nations beyond us. It's a privilege. 'Privilege. To be able to give. But the center of most of our heart, the taproot of most of our lives is a selfish one. And so when I read verses like this, it does something in me that says, God, I want to challenge myself to live with a generous mindset and a generous heart, not just to cramp everything down to just the bare minimum. And the fifth and final thing, amazing thing about this church is that they were a sending church. It lists the name of 5 preachers and teachers. And God speaks to them. He says 2 of those 5 need to be sent to do something else. Saul and Barnabas. And it says while they worshiped, they fasted, they prayed, and they sent. Can you imagine how tough that goodbye must have been? We know we'll see them again, but we're saying goodbye. They're going off to plant churches. This is probably the most important one of the 5 for this morning, is a base church is at heart a sending church, where it's not just for me. It's not just about my family. It's not just what can we get out of it. It's what can we do as a church to continue spreading the gospel around the world. When Peter and Karen Rasmussen handed over the leadership of the eldership team to Jackson and myself, they've embarked the last 7 years. They've been doing Paul and Barnabas type work around the world and around the city of Durban. They are funded from this local church. And it's an exceptional privilege that when they are in Denmark today, they're at Michael and Lucinda's church in Næstved. That's Pete's brother. They were here in this church and planted a church in Denmark. Peter and Karen are in Denmark this morning, and the reason that they can be there is because of us being willing and able to send. Over the years, a number of different people, guys that were on eldership or part of the church, have gone to different areas. Ross and Elmarie, Colby, amazing people. Ended up in Cityhill Waterfall, Cityhill Pinetown, are now in New Zealand in Wellington. Ross got a job there, and before he went, he said, God, I only want to go if I can also start a church. So they're busy planting something. They're figuring out how it goes in Wellington, New Zealand. Stephen Bron Rothquill, leading One City in Westville, they used to be part of this church. This Connie and Kathy down in Umkomaas, Tim and Paula Peterson doing an amazing thing in Cityhill and Manzim Toti. They planted from scratch in Toti. Ferdy and Ria came here from Toti. Awesome place. And pretty tough to plant churches. Some of the church plants I know that have happened there. Tim and Paula's church plant has had so much of God's grace. It's phenomenal. I've been there a couple of times. Henrique and Sunel up in Maputo. Mark and Megan McKinley at a church in Bryanston. Mark and Rose planted a church in Gaborone, are now in Leicester in the UK. Dave and Jenny Hitch, both in business. Church in Eston. There was a need there. They just slotted in with their leadership team and are connecting, making things happen, helping doing amazing work in Eston. Many more names that I could mention. But this is what I guess the message I'm trying to convey is in our hearts, do we carry a bigness that says, God, this isn't just about us. This isn't just about my life and our local church and things going well here. That Antioch church is a snapshot that inspires us to be nation changers of our nation and of the nations of the world. We may not be able to solve all the problems in the world, but we can start somewhere and do some. And we, by God's grace, want to do more and more and more. Tim asked this question last week. He said, who seated here might be feeling the finger of God on their hearts to go and start something somewhere? I could never plant a church. Well, what about just going and finding 5 friends in another country or another city and starting a meeting in a house somewhere and just see what comes of it? See what God does. Maybe if it grows, somebody else could come in and help lead. Who knows? There's a very different kind of outlook to just I'm immigrating for economic reasons. This is gospel sending into nations of the world. And may our hearts be open to going to nations rich and poor. Not just if you're an English speaker, not just English-speaking nations, but the nations of the world. God help us. We want to be a base church that impacts the world for Christ. Would you stand together with me, please?